Coming up on Network Africa. Fake medicine kills several children, including a 2-year-old in Egypt. Mozambique approves local militias in jihadist fight in northern Cabo Delgado province. The U.S. Africa summit ends as U.S. Secretary of State echoes concerns about private military contractor linked to Russia. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. Several children are reported to have died in Egypt after being mistakenly given fake antibiotics. In one case, a 2-year-old child with a high temperature died after hospital doctors injected him with drugs that turned out to be counterfeit. Egyptian media say more than $160 million worth of fake medicines have been seized there in the past month alone, though the problem is a global one. A recent report by the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene estimated that counterfeit medicines kill as many as 300,000 children each year. Mozambique's parliament has approved a bill legalizing the involvement of local forces in the fight against jihadists in the northern Cabo Delgado province. Local militias have been assisting the army and its allies from Rwanda and the Southern African Regional Bloc in the fight against jihadists in the province. Defense Minister Cristóvão Chume, who presented the bill in Parliament, admitted that the Mozambican army was not strong enough to tackle jihadist activities on its own. He said there was an urgent need to establish local forces to strengthen the army in combating and containing the spread of incursions. He gave the assurance that they would protect community settlements and public and private infrastructure, similar to strategies used in other jurisdictions where national security was compromised. The local forces are made up of volunteer former combatants. And at least 1,700 people fleeing violence between armed factions in South Sudan's northern Upper Nile state have crossed into Sudan. UNICEF had earlier said that violence between armed groups in the Upper Nile state that started in August was forcing thousands of women and children to flee their homes amid reports of rising civilian deaths, injuries, and abductions. The clashes have since spread to Jonglei and Unity states. The UN reports that the violence had killed at least 166 people. A member of Sudan's state-run Humanitarian Aid Commission, Salah Taj al-Sir, said large numbers of South Sudanese fleeing the violence had arrived in the border state of White Nile. He called on aid groups to provide urgent assistance to the refugees. Elsewhere, U.S. President Joe Biden posed with African leaders for a family photo at the U.S. Africa Leaders Summit in Washington as the conference wound down. Earlier in the day, Mr. Biden announced that he would support the African Union joining the G20 group of large economies as a permanent member, part of Washington's efforts to reinvigorate ties with a region that has taken a backseat to other priorities in recent years. President Biden, speaking at a U.S. Africa Leaders Summit event, said the United States is looking to increase collaboration in all areas. African leaders from 49 countries and the AU gathered this week in Washington for a 3-day summit that began on Tuesday with the focus on climate change, food security, trade partnerships, and other issues. The Biden administration has been criticized by some as inattentive to Africa, echoing a common complaint about U.S. foreign policy, but one that has rung louder since China deepened its political and economic roots on the continent.
The challenges we face are both clear and they are urgent. That's why this year alone, the United States is committed nearly $11 billion in humanitarian and food security assistance to deal with food insecurity, including a dramatic surge on the Horn of Africa. And this afternoon, I'm announcing an additional $2 billion in humanitarian assistance. We're going to continue to ensure that the G7 and the G20 remain focused on food security. As I announced earlier today, we fully support the African Union joining the G20 as a permanent member.
Well, good evening, everyone.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said during the summit that the United States partners in Africa reject the presence of the Wagner group due to a record that links it to human rights abuses and destabilization. During a closing news conference for the African Leaders Summit in Washington, D.C., Mr. Blinken said that he heard concerns related to Wagner's forces that had been deployed in the past to countries like the Central African Republic, Mozambique, Mali, and Libya. The Wagner Group is a private military contractor with close ties to the Kremlin. Its forces are known to be fighting in parts of Ukraine. Earlier in the week, France's foreign ministry said the Burkina Faso government was fully aware of the risks of working with mercenaries from Russia's Wagner Group after Ghana alleged that Burkina Faso had hired the group.
We've heard repeated concerns that Wagner and groups that are linked to it manufacture or exploit insecurity. They threaten stability. They undermine good governance. They rob countries of mineral wealth. They violate human rights. And we've heard that and seen that again and again. If you go back to 2017, Wagner forces have deployed to the Central African Republic. They've deployed to Mozambique, to Mali, to Libya. And at the same time, we've seen disinformation campaigns that are furthering the exploitative goals that Wagner and its founder have quite literally across the continent of Africa. Our partners in Africa tell us that they do not want their resources exploited. They don't want the human rights of their people abused. They don't want their governance undermined. And ultimately, as a result, they really don't want Wagner. There is a two-track approach and these tracks are pretty much joined. The Nairobi process and then the efforts that Angola is leading that led to an agreement in Luanda, where all sides made commitments to, in effect, pull back and de-escalate the situation. And that's an important agreement. And if and as it's implemented, I think it offers tremendous promise for ending the current conflict and hopefully leading to more durable.
Thank you.
Elsewhere, South Africa's governing ANC has begun its national conference to elect its new leadership. President Cyril Ramaphosa is hoping to be re-elected as party leader after escaping an impeachment inquiry earlier this week. This is after the ANC MPs voted against the adoption of a report which found that he may have breached the country's anti-corruption legislation following the theft of a large sum of foreign currency at its private game farm. Mr. Ramaphosa will face off against former Health Minister Zweli Mkhize for the top post. It's widely expected that the party's Integrity Committee will table its report on the Farmgate scandal that almost cost Mr. Ramaphosa his job, as well as a corruption scandal that entangled his competitor. It's alleged that the former Minister of Health benefited from a COVID-19 government tender in which communication contracts were awarded to his allies. This will be followed by the adoption of credentials, a process that could take hours and is usually contested by various factions because that determines which delegates are eligible to take part in the vote. Meanwhile, South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, says he has launched a private prosecution against its successor, Cyril Ramaphosa. The announcement was made by the Jacob Zuma Foundation, which said President Ramaphosa was charged for serious crimes, but did not specify the alleged offense. It added that the crimes carry a sentence of 15 years imprisonment. In a response on Twitter this morning, President Ramaphosa accused Mr. Zuma of abuse of legal processes. He termed the charges completely spurious and unfounded. In the meantime, the ruling African National Congress is failing South Africa due to its infighting. This is the statement of former President Thabo Mbeki's brother. Political analyst Moletseki Mbeki says the ANC has failed in its challenge to restructure the country after the end of apartheid. Delegates from the governing African National Congress converged in Johannesburg today and will be meeting until Tuesday next week to pick their candidate for the party leadership. Historically, this is the ticket that decides who leads the country. The next national elections are due in 2024. President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to win re-election as leader of his party after he was spared impeachment proceedings over a scandal dubbed Farmgate, involving millions of dollars found stashed in the sofas of his private farm.
It has been the challenge of the ANC is to restructure the South African economy so that it becomes less dependent on cheap labor, less dependent on minerals, on the export of minerals, and more diversified so that it employs more people. Well, the ANC hasn't achieved that. The ANC is spending more time fighting amongst themselves as to what should we do about stabilizing the country, but nobody has a solution that works. So they are at one another's throats, really, which is a futile exercise. If anything, it exasperates the disillusionment of the electorate with the ANC. The voters are now dissatisfied with the ANC because they said to the ANC, you said you were going to diversify the economy, you were going to solve the poverty problem, the inheritance from the apartheid system, but nearly 30 years later, you haven't done so. So the voters are now abandoning the ANC, going to opposition parties, some of them not voting. And that's the challenge the ANC is sitting with. That is the most interesting agenda for 2023, is to what extent the opposition parties are able to form a stable coalition which agrees on how they're going to fight the 2024 national election.
Let's talk to our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, who is live at the ANC's 55th National Conference in Soweto, South Africa. Hello, Betty. Oh, quite a day, I'm sure, that you've had today, but I know that you are live at that ANC National Conference. But then, I mean, the former President Jacob Zuma says he's launching a private investigation against President Cyril Ramaphosa. And of course, we do know that he's just survived an impeachment threat or fright, let me put it that way. What kind of private investigation could this be?
It's a private prosecution because the NPA, that's the National Prosecuting Authority, had according to him, issued a no prosecute letter saying they're not going to prosecute this. So it's not just President Cyril Ramaphosa, it includes Mr. Billy Downer in his corruption case, whom he's been fighting or trying to get to recuse himself from the case. There's a journalist involved and I think one other person. So I guess from my view and some people's views as well, it may be a last-ditch effort, to try to get the president to step aside, because according to the resolution in the last Congress in 2017, if you're criminally charged or if you're charged anyhow, you're supposed to step aside. So it may have been their last-ditch effort to get him to step aside, because today, after an 8-hour delay because of accreditation of delegates, when the president tried to speak, that was when President Zuma, former President Zuma, walked in, and the delegates from KwaZulu-Natal, which is his home province, they've been chanting all sorts of things. They just calm down now. They've been chanting from change to Zuma, load shedding, step aside, But things are a bit calm. The president is still speaking. It's a bit calm for now, but we don't expect things to remain calm because the president is currently presenting his political report as expected. That's the only open session for today till much later in the night or in the early hours of tomorrow. But the others are closed sessions. So many other reports are expected to be presented, including the Integrity Commission report, which people expect they will touch on the Para farm issue as well as the Digital Vibes issue. Digital Vibes scandal involves his opponent in this race, his major opponent, because there will be further nominations from the floor. So we don't know who else is coming up against Dr. Zwelim Kize and President Cyril Ramaphosa. So we're still watching to see what, but the KZN delegates from where Dr. Zwelim Kize, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, and former President Zuma come from. They're spoiling for a fight here, but President Ramaphosa is trying to keep calm, but it's not been an easy day because the delay has been quite long.
Yeah, I can imagine how uncalm that he may be. But so when can we look forward to the actual election of a leader of the ANC?
All right. Much later in the day, there will be calls for further nominations, but the election proper will be tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. That won't be an open session. The voting itself won't be an open session, but much later on Saturday, the results will be called out, and it's going to be a staggered kind of election where about 4 members of the top 6, that's the president, I think the secretary, let me not say what I'm not sure of, but it will be split into 2. They will vote for a set from the top 6, the second set, including the deputy president from the top 6, and later on, the rest of the NEC. So, but as you asked for the next president of the ANC, which may well be the current, but anything can happen. It will be later on Saturday. That's when the results will be out, which is different from NASREC 2017 when the results came out much later.
Indications that this, farm gate scandal will taint the process.
It is part of the process. Everyone is talking about it. His rivals are trying to look for ways to ensure that it's thrown up out there that he must step aside. Whether they will succeed is another thing we're not sure. But the Integrity Commission, as I mentioned, is one of the commissions I'll be making presentations in a closed session today. If this delay doesn't, affect the process, and we expect them to talk about the Para farm. We expect them to talk about the other issues that they consider may have brought the ANC into disrepute. That's why that commission was constituted in the first place. So definitely, Para farm is part of this process. And I know that the step aside rule, again, which some people feel is being selectively applied, some people feel that way, is one of the constitutional issues of the Congress or conference or the party that they may be looking at working on. But how people will receive that and what is going to do for their process is another thing entirely. But we're watching to see. It's not going to be an easy process because there are many unhappy people. But one thing that they've done to draw people in is those who did not vote with the party. If you recall, during that Section 89 report consideration, who voted against party lines, they said they will allow them. They're not going to charge them or go through disciplinary process with them. They will they're going to allow the next NEC to deal with that issue. So everyone, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma is on the podium, or is on the high table with President Cyril Ramaphosa, and some of the other people. They're all there. President Cyril Ramaphosa is there, and the other people who voted against party lines. So it's all daggers drawn. It's all daggers drawn, but everyone is trying to smile to one another.
Yeah, I can just imagine the atmosphere in the room. Well, thank you for that robust update. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty De Beer, speaking to us live from Soweto.
Thank you.
We're still ahead on the program. Faced with East Africa's worst droughts in 4 decades, Kenyans divided over genetically modified organisms. Details in a moment. Welcome back to the program. Here in Nigeria, Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu has felicitated with President Muhammadu Buhari on his 80th birthday, describing him as one who is never found to be corrupt. Governor Sanwo-Olu, in a statement by his Chief Press Secretary, Boyega Akosile, said President Buhari's unblemished service in public office has made him a role model to many Nigerians. The statement reads in part, President Buhari, to date, remains one of the most respected and honest world leaders who is never found to be corrupt despite the juicy positions he has held in the military and other public offices at state, regional, national and international levels in the last 50 years. The governor said President Buhari has provided honest and transparent leadership in the country, adding that the president, since he assumed office on May 29, 2015, has demonstrated unparalleled patriotism, integrity, honesty and courage in the task of steering the ship of Nigeria in the right direction. He also praised the president for delivering on his promises to Nigerians, especially in the fight against corruption and insurgency and for the building of infrastructure in different parts of the country. Elsewhere, 2 opposition Senegalese MPs have been arrested for assaulting their pregnant colleague in Parliament earlier this month. It follows the chaos that erupted during a budget debate in Parliament in scenes that were televised. The video of the fight was shared widely on social media. Masata Samb is said to have slapped the female MP, Amy Nibi, after she scoffed at him during the debate. She threw a chair at him before another MP, Mamadou Niang, kicked her in the stomach after she was pushed to the ground. Both Mr. Samb and Mr. Niang have been detained and are charged with voluntarily causing hurt. Their lawyer says the detention violates their parliamentary immunity. They are expected to appear in court on Monday. Finally, faced with the East Africa's worst drought in 4 decades, Kenyan President William Ruto's new government lifted a decade-old ban on cultivation and importation of genetically modified maize last month. The decision has come under fire, with critics saying the decision was rushed and failed to address seed availability and long-standing health concerns.
Kenya's drought has ravaged crops and livestock such that the region's wealthiest country struggles to feed its population of 55 million and has consistently had an annual deficit of 10 million bags of the maize staple. The gap is filled by imports, but supply has come under unprecedented pressure in recent years from land fragmentation, urbanization, and skyrocketing prices of inputs like fertilizer, exacerbated by the war in Ukraine. Ruto, who was sworn into office in mid-September, said the move to allow GMO crops was necessary to help ensure food security, an argument swiftly dismissed by maize growers and a smallholder farmers group that has filed a lawsuit against the decision.
The maize we are growing is they're open pollinated varieties. which means if they bring in the BT seeds or the GMO seeds, if we have to avoid the contamination, then it means that we'll have to have that isolation distance. The isolation distance from the BT maize to our indigenous maize, which is about almost 100 meters. Farmers cannot afford that because land is also scarce. We are smallholder farmers and our land holding is very small. So if any other, let's say another smallholder farmer decides to grow the BT maize, then generally or definitely my indigenous seeds will be affected.
That's it on Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Joke Rogers.